Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to another math lesson with Mr. G. Last time when we explored fractions, we explored cutting up different shapes into one half by filling them in. So we had an array of dots, and what we had to do was color the different dots to show one half. Today, what we're going to be doing is working with a different shape of one half because, as you'll soon see with fractions, you can kind of find them anywhere, not just with circles and arrangements. Today we're going to be working with squares, and we want to see how exactly can we fit squares into that idea of one half. If it's a one square, how can we split that into one half? If we have multiple squares, like in a grid, how can we make that into one half? So today's activity is going to be really exploring one half, but not with circles and dots, but more with squares. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so the first thing I want us to look at is this grid right here. So you can see this is a 8 by 8 grid, which means there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares on the top, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares along the side. So it is 8 by 8, or as we say in math, 8 times 8, which equals 64. 64 small squares in total. So can you think of some ways that you can show one half on this board of 8 by 8, this square that's also made up of different squares, which we also call a grid? How can you cut this into one half? Now, there are more than 10 different ways which you can cut this, which is kind of amazing if you think about it, that there's 10 different ways that you can split this to show one half. But I just want you to think of one. You think you found a way to split this into one half. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video, go ahead and show the one half however you may like. So some tips to show one half on this, and it's going to help for the rest of the activity. You might want to fill in some colors. So if you think filling in a certain amount of these colors, of these squares would work, you can click one and fill in the color just like this. Or you can even highlight multiple ones. Like if I wanted to highlight this whole row and color it orange, I can do that as well. Another thing you could do, this is something new that we're going to be doing with fractions, it's cutting them, just like a pizza. So if this was a square pizza, thing you can do is click this line tool right here, and you can go ahead and draw a line somewhere in order to, boom, cut a line through the squares. And so this line's really small, so we're going to go to the line weight option to make it thick, and why don't we make it red to make it stand out? So this is one way where you can cut this square shape any way you want to show one half. So as I said before, why don't you go ahead and give it a good thought? When you feel like you found one way to show one half, can you please show it on here? Take as much time as you need. All right, Mr. G is going to assume that you've paused the video and that you're done showing your way of one half of how to show this square, how to make one half. So there's lots of different ways, like I said, more than 10 different ways in which you can show one half using this square of 64 smaller squares. Here are some ways Mr. G went and came up with. So one way you can do it is by splitting it across this way, kind of diagonally, all the way across. This is something new that we weren't able to do with the dots from the last lesson, if you notice, but in this lesson, you can cut across the different squares to make one half. So right here, let me go ahead and tilt it a little bit. Right here, we have one half in that we have this side is one half and this side is the second half, one half and one half. Another way to make one half, this was a fun way, was the checkerboard way. So if you ever seen a checkerboard flag or a checkered shirt, you notice that it's alternating colors. So one white, one green, one white, one green in my case. And I just made sure that every other block, every other square was a different color than the ones that were touching it. And now we have this cool checkerboard pattern. And you can see that one half of these squares are white, and one half of the squares are green. So this is one half. Another way that you could do it, since this way does take a long time, I have to click each and every single one of these to make it green. I just decided to count the number of rows we have. So I have 1, 2 rows on the top and 2 rows on the bottom that are white. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows that are white. And I decided to paint all of the ones in the middle purple. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows that are purple. So if I counted up all of these little squares in here, that's 36 that are purple and 36 that are white. Same that goes for this one. If I were to look at the area of this one as well, I'd make, see that 36 are on this side and 36 are on this side, even counting the half squares right here. So really cool, really interesting. So today's activity is going to be very similar to the spotting 1/2 activity we did last time, but it's going to be a little more challenging in that you're going to have some shapes that you might need to find some creative ways to make 1/2. You can't just click a box and say there's no way to make 1/2. You're actually going to have to try and make 1/2 however you want. So one cool thing I want to remind you now is that you can cut a shape by using the line tool right here to kind of cut this any way you would a pizza. So it's really cool, this line shape. So I'm showing it right here. You can cut a shape any which way to make it into a different fraction. So that's gonna be able to help you out on some of these tricky numbers. So instructions are, find a way to cut the grid of squares into 1/2. You can cut a square in half in order to make 1/2 finally. And remember, you can fill squares or cut them in half. So you don't have to do one or the other. Just like with this way, if you really like cutting it up right here, that's just fine. You can, I encourage you to actually try this way. This is something new for you maybe. Or if you just like filling it in like what we did with the dots last time, you can go ahead and fill it. And just a reminder here, you can use the line tool right over here to draw a line and cut the squares. So for example, we have number 1. This is a 1 by 1. So this is just one square right in the middle. So how can you cut this into 1/2? Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, before we get started, that you cannot just fill this in one color to make 1/2, because if I fill it in blue, it's one whole blue. But if I take away the color, it's one whole white. So it's not a half at all. So I have to figure out, how can I make this 1/2? So I think I'm gonna have to use my line tool to figure out a way in which I can cut this to show 1/2. So Mr. G's not gonna show you on this one, because this is one I want you to think about, stick with it for some time and figure out how you can split this into 1/2. Any way you can imagine it. 1/2 of it needs to be on one side, the other has to be on the other side. So remember, use the line tool for this one to see how you can split this into 1/2 to show this. So the rest of the grids that you'll be faced with today, some of them you can do the splitting with the line, or some of them you might even want to do the fill color option by filling in one of the boxes like so. So if it's a 2 by 2, how can I show 1/2? By coloring it in or splitting it in half. Same with 3 by 3, 4 by 4, 5 by 5, 6 by 6, and up to 7 by 7. So finding a way for each of these cards of squares, how can you make 1/2? That is your challenge today. After that, please don't forget to explain how you cut each square in 1/2, what your strategies were, and that's it for today. Our last fraction activity is going to be something interesting. It's going to be kind of like a scavenger hunt, so I'm really looking forward to explaining that one next. Until next time, see you later.